It seems advanced economies have more vaccines than they know what to do with. So why is Sub-Saharan Africa still struggling to get anywhere near what they need to put their economies back on the rails?
Well, part of it is due to the fact that there are several countries that are piling up vaccines.
Welcome to this IMF podcast. In today's program, how the pandemic and climate change are weighing heavily on Sub-Saharan Africa's latest economic outlook.
The same way we say that to deal with the pandemic, the region needs to have access to vaccines. To address the climate issues, the region needs to be at the table. I am Papanjai, head of the Regional Studies Division in the African Department of the International Monetary Fund.
So the theme of this review is one planet, two worlds, and three stories. Mm-hmm. The planet divided, I assume, is about how some countries are emerging from this crisis while others are actually falling behind. Where does Sub-Saharan Africa fit into that picture?
Indeed, Bruce, you're right. This is exactly what we are seeing and what we are discussing in our latest Regional Economic Outlook report. We are at a point where our projections indicate or show that many countries, especially in advanced economies and emerging markets, are gaining momentum with stronger growth. But in many emerging and developing economies, especially countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, growth continues to worsen. And this is this divergence in economic fortunes, if you want, is becoming more and more persistent. If you look at, for example, advanced economies, they are expected to return to their pre-crisis path in terms of for output. And this will happen by 2023. But for Sub-Saharan Africa, the pandemic has essentially permanently lowered the path of real incomes or GDP. And we expect a drop in per capita income of about 5.5%. And, closing or undoing that or correcting this will require countries in the region to grow twice as fast as they are projected to do for the next 3 years. So it is important that the region gets the help that it needs to get back on track for faster convergence with the rest of the world.
So going back to the three stories, as we mentioned at the top, I assume that divergence is one of those stories. What are the other two stories that you focus on in this report?
Indeed, divergence is one of the three stories, and it is divergence at various levels. It's divergence that I mentioned earlier, though, between Sub-Saharan Africa and advanced economies. It's divergence between countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and within countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. So the second story we focus on in the report is on really the increasingly difficult policy environment that the authorities in the regions are operating in. And this relates to the competing fiscal challenges in particular. So, and there are essentially three competing challenges that policymakers have to contend with, are grappling with in the region, including tackling the region pressing development needs amid the rising demographics, containing public debt given the elevated vulnerability that exists, and mobilizing tax revenues in circumstances in which essentially raising additional revenue is very unpopular. So this is the difficult policy trilemma that the authorities are facing, and it wasn't easy to deal with it before the crisis, and now it has become even more difficult. And the third story really is on the need for international solidarity and cooperation, whether it's on vaccines, on financial support, and also on addressing the burden of climate change.
Yeah, and where are we at in terms of vaccine access? Like, what is the percentage of people who have been able to get vaccines on the continent, and to what extent is that affecting the outlook?
Yeah, so it's the continent is lagging behind. Only just today is 3% of the population that's fully vaccinated,
Wow.
right? Compared with over 60% if you look at some of the advanced economies. So, and this is holding back the recovery. There are two main reasons behind the divergence we talked about earlier. One is the limited access to vaccines, and the second one is the policy support, the limited policy space that the authorities have. So for countries to get out of or to manage to improve their growth prospects and really get back on the convergence path that they were before the crisis, there will be a need for greater access to vaccines. And this is also important if you think about the objective that the international community has to end the pandemic, because the pandemic is not over until it's over everywhere. So it will be important for the region to have access to vaccines, lest we will see as more and more variants that will undo any progress that was done before.
And what are the major barriers in terms of vaccine access? Is it production that needs to happen on the continent, or is it just access to vaccines that are produced, outside?
Well, part of it is due to the fact that there are several countries that are piling up vaccines. And, production is not an issue. The world is set to produce about 12 billion doses in 2021. But despite that, it will be more likely that, it will be more than a year before we can see a meaningful number of people vaccinated in Sub-Saharan Africa. So, it will be important for maybe, a change in the approach by countries that have access to this vaccine.
And just to conclude, the other crisis in the world, is climate change. And it always strikes me when I see the numbers, how little Africa actually contributes to the problem, yet how much is on the receiving end of the impact of climate change. To what extent are African countries actually being included in global climate policy decisions? And how much can they reasonably do, given the fiscal demands that you mentioned earlier and the high debt levels at the moment?
Indeed, climate change is advancing faster, faster than many of us anticipated, and is likely to have a major impact on the region. So, as you correctly pointed out, the region is world's smallest contributors, for example, contributor to carbon dioxide emissions. With emissions of less than 3% of the global total, but yet it is one of the regions the most vulnerable to climate-related shocks. 1/3 of the world's droughts happen in the region, and given also its high dependence on rain-fed agriculture, this really means that climate events have a significant impact on the region's economy, which makes it very vulnerable to rising temperatures and extreme weather, for example, events. So it is paramount that the region join the global effort to address climate change, and this will have clearly some benefits in terms of slowing the impact of this global warming on Africa. But it also raises a lot of challenges. So, as you noted, addressing this climate change will entail significant cost. For example, carbon taxes and the removal of fossil fuel subsidies could add to the cost of electricity, of cost of fuel. And not only that, but the measures that other countries are taking to deal with climate change, for example, to avoid carbon leakages and so on, will also likely impact the export opportunities that the region has. So the regions will need to encourage perhaps, to go on a different path, change the growth strategy and you engage into a low carbon industrialization path that focuses maybe on less polluting activities, industries without smokestacks, as we say, services and renewables, for example. But this is a very difficult balancing act, which will require help from the international community and a fair burden sharing. So, but I think just the same way we say that to deal with the pandemic, the region needs to have access to vaccines and so on. To address the climate issues, the region needs to be at the table, because when you look at the demographic trends in the region, any realistic effort that need to be made to reduce global emission will need to take into account the region. So therefore, there is a need for continued and stronger cooperation and dialogue.
Papa Njai, head of the team that produces the Regional Economic Outlook for Sub-Saharan Africa. Thanks for this.
Thank you, Bruce.
Papa Njai is head of the Regional Studies Division in the IMF African Department. There's much more in the report. Look for Sub-Saharan Africa's latest economic outlook at imf.org, also published in French. And look for other IMF podcasts wherever you listen, and follow us on Twitter at IMF_podcast. I'm Bruce Edwards. Thanks for listening.